In quiet moments, history has a way of unfolding, gently and in its own time. Tonight, we'll journey through tales of ships and distant seas, of treasures sought and cities lost beneath the waves. We'll linger over small details and trace the rhythms of lives long past. No urgency, just a slow drift through the pages of history.
Imagine yourself stepping aboard a ship that seems smaller than you imagined. Its wooden sides rise only modestly above the water, and the sails overhead billow and snap with the shifting winds. As you walk across the deck, you notice how little space there is to move without brushing against ropes, barrels, coiled lines, or other men going about their tasks. Everything feels close, tight, as though the entire ship has been built just barely large enough to stay afloat. You take a moment to look around. The wooden planks beneath your feet are damp, darkened by constant sprays of seawater. Salt crystals sparkle faintly in the seams between boards, and here and there water pools in shallow depressions worn smooth by countless boots. The scent of the sea mingles with the smell of tar, old timber, and the faint, ever-present hint of sweat. Even in moments when the sun shines warm overhead, the air holds a damp coolness that seeps into your bones. There is no escaping the moisture. It's as though the sea itself has climbed aboard the ship, determined to claim every crevice and corner. As you descend a narrow set of steps into the ship's interior, the air changes noticeably. It becomes heavier, thicker, laden with the scent of wet wood and oil. The light fades quickly, replaced by the flickering glow of lanterns swinging from low beams. You find yourself bending your neck to avoid striking the ceiling, which hangs close above your head, leaving little room for comfort. The walls and beams glisten slightly where condensation gathers, tiny droplets running down the grain of the timber in thin, meandering paths. The space below deck feels narrow, as if the very timbers are pressing inward. Hammocks sway gently between the beams, hung so close together that a man turning over in his sleep might easily brush against the side of his neighbor's canvas sling. The air is warm and stale, carrying the mingled odors of sweat, damp rope, and salted meat. It's not an unpleasant smell in any one moment, but it builds, day after day, into a persistent fog of human presence that cannot be fully aired out. In this dim world, privacy does not exist. Every man sees, hears, and smells the existence of every other. Conversations must be kept low because sound carries easily in the close quarters. Even the small noises, a man coughing, another sighing in his sleep, echo faintly through the beams. When the sea grows rough, the hammocks swing harder, ropes creak above, and water sometimes trickles down the walls in thin, cold streams. Buckets are placed under persistent drips, but no matter how many there are, water always finds new paths, soaking blankets and clothing, and leaving a chill that sinks deep into the skin. Even when the sun returns, drying the deck above, the lower parts of the ship remain damp. Moisture lingers in the wood, and the smell of wet timber stays heavy in the air. Clothes hung up to dry often remain stubbornly damp to the touch. Mildew forms in quiet corners, leaving pale blooms of white or green across beams and planks. Men sometimes spend hours scrubbing the wood with salt water and sand, trying to keep the ship clean and the rot at bay. Yet the battle is endless, for the sea always finds its way back in. In the spaces between labor and sleep, men sometimes gather on deck, grateful simply for the open air. They lean against the rails, feeling the breeze on their faces, trying to dry their hair and shirts. They talk quietly, or sometimes simply stare at the waves. For a few moments they might forget the narrow darkness below. But as soon as the call comes for the next watch, they descend again into the cramped world of beams and ropes, where the ceiling hovers just above their heads and the walls seem to press closer with each passing day. And so it goes, day after day. The ship creaks and groans, the ropes tighten and slacken, the sails billow and fall. There is always water, dripping, soaking, seeping. There is always the press of other bodies, the smell of men living together in spaces far too small. In this life, there is no privacy, no true solitude, and no escape from the dampness that becomes as much a part of you as the salt in your blood. And even as the ship sails toward distant horizons, the men aboard remain bound together in this small floating world, carried over endless seas, ever at the mercy of wind, wave, and the closeness of each other.
Imagine yourself waking on a morning that feels no different from any other. Your eyes open slowly in the dimness below deck, and you draw in a breath of air that carries a familiar blend of scents: damp timber, oil, sweat, and something faintly sour that seems always to linger. You shift in your hammock, feeling the rough canvas beneath your back, and glance around at the other men rising beside you, their faces drawn, eyes heavy with fatigue. Even before your feet touch the planks, you know what awaits above: the endless sea, the sway of the ship, and the same routine that governs every hour. Among all the trials of life aboard a pirate ship, one of the most insidious was a silent enemy that crept into the body without warning: scurvy. A word whispered among sailors, feared even more than the threat of battle or storms. It came not with violence, but with a slow, creeping weakness. At first, there was only fatigue, a heaviness in the limbs, an ache that seemed to settle in the bones. A man might dismiss it as weariness from labor. But then the gums began to swell, tender and red, until teeth loosened and blood pooled in the mouth. Old wounds reopened as though the body itself was unraveling. Spots appeared on the skin, dark and purplish, as if bruises blossomed without cause. Each symptom seemed small on its own, but together they drained the life from even the strongest men. The cause was a mystery. No one aboard the ship knew that scurvy was born of absence, the absence of fresh fruit and greens, of the invisible nutrients that the body craved. Instead, men spoke of curses, foul airs, or bad water. Some believed vinegar might keep the sickness at bay. Others swore by daily doses of beer or a mouthful of seawater, though none of these remedies truly worked. So the disease continued its slow work, turning robust sailors into shadows, leaving them weak and trembling, unable to lift ropes or climb the rigging. A man with scurvy could go from strong to helpless in the space of a few weeks, until even the effort of drawing breath seemed too great a burden. Yet scurvy was only one of the many silent adversaries that shared the ship. There were others, smaller and quicker, that lived among the crew. Rats were perhaps the most familiar companions on a pirate ship, and they made themselves known in countless small ways. You might see them darting along the beams overhead, quick flashes of gray fur moving through the shadows. You might hear the soft patter of tiny feet across the planks, or the squeaking of teeth as they gnawed through sacks of flour or ropes stored in coils along the walls. Rats were cunning and bold, growing fat on spilled grain and crumbs, and always finding new paths into the food stores no matter how carefully barrels were sealed. At night, as men tried to sleep, rats scurried across hammocks and beams. There were stories of men waking to find a rat perched on their chest, whiskers twitching as it sniffed the salt and sweat upon their skin. Some sailors trapped rats for sport. Others, when supplies grew scarce, trapped and cooked them over small fires, stripping away fur and roasting the flesh on iron skewers. Hunger had a way of making even the most unlikely meals seem acceptable. And yet, despite all efforts, rats remained, breeding and multiplying, as much a part of the ship as the ropes and sails. If rats were a visible nuisance, there were other pests that were smaller and more insidious. Lice,
fleas and tiny mites lived hidden in clothing seams, hair, and bedding. They were almost impossible to eliminate. A man might shave his head and beard in hopes of relief, but the pests returned, clinging to cloth and skin. The constant itch drove sailors to distraction, leading them to scratch until their skin bled. Sometimes men developed rashes or sores, which only added to their misery. In the close quarters of the ship, it was nearly impossible to prevent these vermin from spreading. One man infested with lice could soon ensure that the entire crew shared his burden. Even the ship itself became an unwilling host. Molds crept along damp beams, appearing as pale fuzz or dark spots that stained the wood. The smell was unmistakable, a sour, musty odor that hinted at decay. Men scrubbed the planks with seawater and sand in a constant battle to keep the mold at bay, but it returned again and again, feeding on the dampness that soaked the ship from bow to stern. Living aboard a pirate ship meant accepting these conditions as normal. The scurrying of rats, the endless itch of lice, and the silent dread of scurvy were all woven into the daily rhythm of life. The men spoke of these things only when necessary, often with resignation rather than outrage. Complaining did little good. The ship rolled on across the waves, indifferent to human discomfort, and the men aboard her learned to carry on, burdened by unseen enemies that claimed their health and strength day after day. In moments of calm, when the sun hung bright and high, and the sails filled with steady wind, men might gather in small groups on deck. They would talk softly, or simply sit in silence, staring out at the shifting water. It was in those moments that one might notice how thin the crew had become, how many men scratched absently at their skin, or how the cook now prepared smaller portions as supplies dwindled. The trials of life aboard were written not just in scars or bruises, but in the hollow look in men's eyes, and the quiet way they spoke of sickness and vermin, as though these troubles were as inevitable as the rising and setting sun. And so the ship sailed on, bearing its human cargo across endless seas through sun and storm alike. Rats scurried in the shadows, lice burrowed unseen, and scurvy waited in the dark corners of the voyage, silent and patient. This was the reality beneath the black flag, a world of hidden enemies, of small discomforts that grew into great suffering, and of men who carried on, because there was no other choice.
Imagine yourself standing near the center of the deck as the sun climbs higher in the pale sky. The sails hang overhead like pale wings, shifting gently with each subtle change of wind. Around you, men move about their duties, each task precise and necessary, as though the survival of the ship depends on the constant rhythm of work. And in truth, it often does. The ship is a world unto itself, a floating island where discipline keeps chaos at bay. Without order, even the smallest disagreement could grow into violence, threatening to tear the ship and its crew apart. On a pirate vessel, discipline exists in a curious balance. Pirates were known for their rebellion against kings and nations, but aboard their ships, they still required rules. Freedom from governments did not mean freedom from all restraint. Life at sea was harsh, and the crew had to work together in close quarters. The ship's survival depended on cooperation, on obedience during storms, and on silence when stealth was needed. So, even pirates had codes, agreements written down in simple words, signed by every man who joined the crew. These codes dictated how spoils were divided, how disputes were settled, and what punishments awaited those who broke the rules. Punishments could be severe. A man caught stealing from his fellow sailors might be tied to the mast, his arms stretched high, while lashes cut across his back. The rope, sometimes knotted or stiffened with tar, left welts and bleeding cuts. There was no doctor's comfort beyond a rag soaked in rum and pressed against the skin.
Such punishment was not only to hurt the offender, but to remind the others of the consequences of betrayal. In the stillness that followed each crack of the rope, the crew would stand silent, eyes fixed on the deck, knowing that next time it could be any of them under the whip. Sometimes a punishment was less violent, but no less humiliating. A man might lose his share of the next prize, leaving him penniless after weeks of labor. Or he might be assigned to extra watches, forced to remain awake and working while his shipmates rested in their hammocks. These were not punishments of blood, but they wore a man down, slowly eroding his strength and hope. To be shunned by one's crewmates or to lose the small measure of wealth one had fought for was a punishment that lingered long after the lashes had healed. Despite these harsh measures, discipline among pirates was not solely the captain's right. On many pirate ships, the crew had the power to remove a captain who was too cruel, too reckless, or too cowardly. The quartermaster often served as the crew's voice, protecting the men from a captain's tyranny. If enough sailors agreed, they could vote the captain out, replacing him with another man chosen from among their ranks. This balance of power created a tension on board, a constant awareness that authority existed only so long as it was accepted by the crew. Yet this fragile balance was forever threatened by the specter of mutiny. The word itself carried a weight heavier than cannon or storm. A mutiny meant more than just disagreement. It meant betrayal, violence, and the possibility of bloodshed among men who shared the same narrow planks beneath their feet. Mutinies were whispered about in dark corners, eyes darting side to side, hands moving to rest lightly on hilts. The mere suggestion that a captain might be unfit could spark a quiet conspiracy, growing in secret until a handful of men seized the moment to act. The causes of mutiny were many. Sometimes it was greed, a belief that the captain was taking more than his fair share of the spoils. Other times it was fear, when men thought the captain's decisions would lead them into danger. There were captains who drank too deeply of rum, their judgment clouded, barking orders that placed the ship in peril. There were captains who grew cruel, punishing sailors for imagined slights, turning the crew's loyalty into silent hatred. And there were captains who simply lost the respect of their men, their authority crumbling like old wood beneath the salt and spray. Mutinies did not always end in blood. Some captains were left marooned on deserted islands, given a musket, a single shot, and perhaps a bottle of water. The crew would sail away, leaving their former leader staring at the shrinking sails, alone among the waves. Other times, the ship was divided, with some men departing in captured vessels to form new crews. Yet the threat of violence always lingered. Knives hidden in belts, whispered oaths taken beneath lantern light, eyes that watched for the right moment to strike. Amid these tensions, most sailors walked a careful path. They obeyed orders, even those they disliked, because the sea was unforgiving, and a divided crew was doomed. The ship demanded unity. Storms showed no mercy to quarreling men, and enemy vessels would pounce on any sign of weakness. And so discipline was maintained, often harshly, because the alternative was chaos, and chaos at sea was a death sentence. Imagine yourself then living under such constant watchfulness, every word measured, every action weighed against its possible consequences. Freedom was the lure that brought many men to piracy, but even freedom had its limits aboard the ship. For in this floating world, discipline and loyalty were the thin ropes that held everything together, keeping the sea outside the hull and the crew from tearing itself apart. And so the men endured, eyes always alert, hearts always cautious, moving through each day beneath the quiet knowledge that one careless word could make them the next lashed to the mast or left alone upon some distant shore.
Imagine yourself standing on deck beneath a sky washed clean after a passing rain. The sails hang full and pale above. The sea glitters with quiet ripples,
and a faint breeze carries the scent of salt and distant lands. Around you, the crew moves with a certain energy, a subtle charge in the air, because the hold below the planks now contains the weight of treasure captured from another ship. In the wake of violence and risk comes the moment all pirates anticipate, the dividing of the plunder. Among pirates, the notion of fairness held a particular power. It was fairness, at least in theory, that separated pirate crews from the harsh hierarchies of naval ships or merchant vessels. Many men turned pirate because they believed they would be treated as equals, not simply as expendable laborers. And so, aboard pirate ships, rules were written down in simple, plain language, understood by all. These were the pirate articles, agreements that governed how prizes were to be divided, how disputes were settled, and what share each man was entitled to claim. The typical pirate code dictated that the captain received 2 shares of any prize, while the quartermaster also received an increased portion for his duties in managing discipline and supplies. Skilled men, such as carpenters or surgeons, might receive an extra half-share, recognizing that their talents could mean the difference between life and death for the crew. The remainder of the loot was divided equally among the common sailors, each man receiving a portion meant to reflect the risk he undertook every day beneath the black flag. Yet even these rules, clear as they seemed, left room for friction. For gold and silver, rare gems and silks had a way of stirring greed in men's hearts. A single chest might contain wealth enough to change a man's life forever, lifting him from the grind of salt and toil into a world of comfort he could scarcely imagine. And so, after a successful capture, the mood aboard ship could swing between celebration and quiet suspicion as men watched one another with eyes sharp as blades. Picture the crew gathered on deck, barrels and chests dragged out from the shadows below. Coins spill across rough wooden planks, glinting in the sun. Bolts of cloth, shimmering in rich colors, lie stacked to one side. Small items, rings, watches, chains of gold, are laid out carefully so that each man might see the wealth for himself. The quartermaster stands at the center, sometimes joined by the captain, to oversee the count and ensure that nothing vanishes unseen. Voices are kept low, but tension hums beneath the surface. Each item is weighed and tallied as fairly as the crew can manage. Coins are often measured in small piles, counted piece by piece under watchful eyes. Yet not all treasures are easy to divide. A single pearl necklace, a jeweled dagger, or a fine silk coat cannot be split into equal pieces. In such cases, items might be auctioned off to the highest bidder among the crew, with the winning bid deducted from the man's share of coin. But even this system breeds its own suspicions, as some men believe others hold secret stores of money or receive favors from officers. Arguments sometimes erupt. A man might claim he deserves extra for bravery shown during the boarding of a prize ship, insisting that he was the first over the rail or that he captured an officer who tried to resist. Another might protest that he was wounded in the fight and ought to be compensated for his blood. The quartermaster must navigate these claims carefully, for favoritism is poison aboard a pirate ship. Too much unfairness, and the crew might refuse to follow orders. Worse, whispers of mutiny might begin, fueled by resentment over perceived injustices. It is not only treasure that causes disputes. Sometimes captured ships themselves become the subject of debate. A fine, fast vessel might be kept as part of the pirate fleet, replacing an older or damaged ship. Other times, a captured ship is sold off in a friendly port, its price added to the common purse.
But deciding who sails the new ship, who remains behind, and how to split the proceeds can set crew against crew. Men who have worked side by side through storm and battle might suddenly regard each other as rivals, each guarding his share of fortune as fiercely as any prize ever taken. And then there are the quiet thefts, the small acts of greed carried out in shadows. A handful of coins pocketed when no one is watching. A jewel slipped into a shoe, hidden beneath the sole. Even the most carefully watched counting cannot catch every act of deception. Stories circulate among the crew of captains who skim off the finest gems for themselves, or quartermasters who quietly hide small fortunes behind false panels in the hull. Trust becomes fragile, a thin thread stretched tight across the wide spaces of the sea. Despite these tensions, the promise of shared treasure remains one of the few hopes that keep men aboard. The dream that the next prize might finally bring freedom, a small house on a distant shore, a shop in a quiet town, a life far from salt and rope and endless waves. And so the crew gathers each time the plunder is divided, eyes shining as coins spill from chests, hearts beating faster as piles of silver and gold grow beneath the sun. For a moment, the hardships of the sea fade into the background, replaced by visions of comfort and rest. Yet, as the chests are closed and the shares distributed, the murmurs begin again. Some men feel cheated. Others suspect the quartermaster of favoritism. Old grievances stir, and quiet resentments smolder like coals beneath damp straw. Life aboard a pirate ship offers riches, but it also offers endless opportunity for suspicion and division. And so the pirates live on, each man driven by the hope of gold, the fear of betrayal, and the fragile rules that stand between them and chaos. For while the sea might be wide and empty, the decks of a ship are narrow indeed, and every man must live beside his fellows day after day, beneath the same wind-filled sails.
Imagine yourself in a Caribbean harbor, beneath the blazing sun, where tall ships lie anchored in calm waters that shimmer like sheets of polished glass. The air is thick with the mingled scents of salt, tar, and the sweet sharpness of tropical blossoms drifting from the nearby shore. Along the bustling docks, sailors move with deliberate purpose, hoisting barrels, repairing sails, and speaking in the low tones of men who have learned to keep secrets close. Among them, sometime in the early years of the 18th century, moves a man who is not yet a legend. His name is Edward Teach. He is a tall figure, broad-shouldered, with a dark beard that even then grows thick along his jaw. His eyes are sharp beneath a furrowed brow, and his movements carry the ease of someone well accustomed to the pitch and roll of a ship. At this point in his life, Edward Teach is a privateer, a sailor given license by his government to raid enemy ships during times of war. The Caribbean is alive with such men, for the War of the Spanish Succession has turned the seas into a chessboard of nations, each trying to weaken the other by disrupting trade. Teach learns his craft aboard privateer ships, where he serves under captains skilled in both seamanship and the violent art of naval engagement. He witnesses how cannon are loaded and fired in quick succession, how sails are trimmed for sudden chases, and how boarding parties leap from one deck to another with cutlasses drawn.
In these years, he grows familiar with the scent of gunpowder and the cries of men fighting for their lives on narrow decks slick with seawater. Yet even as he serves his country, Teach watches and listens, storing away knowledge that will one day serve a different purpose. In port cities like Kingston, Nassau, and Port Royal, the line between privateer and pirate grows thin. A letter of marque, a government license to attack enemy ships, can expire overnight. Peace treaties are signed in distant capitals, leaving men who once hunted legally suddenly unemployed. Many sailors, skilled only in the arts of war, turn to piracy rather than return to honest labor. Ships that once sailed under the flags of England or France now bear the black flag, and former privateers become outlaws, almost without noticing the change. It is in this environment that Teach finds himself drifting toward piracy. The shift is gradual, marked less by a single decision than by a series of circumstances. Perhaps it begins when Teach serves under Benjamin Hornigold, an English privateer who becomes one of the first notable pirate captains in the Caribbean. Hornigold, respected for his skills and known for maintaining discipline among his crew, offers Teach an example of how a man might carve out power on the lawless sea.
Imagine yourself aboard a ship sailing in the warm waters of the Caribbean. The sky overhead is an endless blue, the sun brilliant upon the waves, and the sails above you swell and snap with each shift of the breeze. The horizon lies open in every direction, and yet a subtle tension coils in the air. For among the countless ships plying these seas, there is one name spoken in low tones, a name that stirs unease even among hardened sailors. That name is Blackbeard. By the time Edward Teach fully embraces piracy, he understands a vital truth of life at sea. Fear can be more powerful than the sharpest blade or the heaviest cannon. The sea is vast, but ships are small worlds, ruled as much by rumor and reputation as by force. Teach knows that to maintain control, not only over his own men, but over the ships he seeks to capture, he must create a presence so fearsome that resistance becomes unthinkable. And so he begins to build an image, carefully shaped, as deliberate as the knots tied in his ship's rigging. It begins with his appearance. Edward Teach allows his beard to grow long and thick, dark as night, framing his face like the mane of some wild creature. He braids it into tails, tying them with ribbons of black and crimson, so that the hair swings and shifts as he moves. His eyes, already intense, appear even more penetrating beneath the shadow of this dark mass, and men swear they see a fire burning in their depths. He cultivates this look not merely for vanity, but as a tool. On the eve of battle, he weaves slow-burning fuses into his beard, lighting them so that thin streams of smoke curl and twist around his face. To see him thus, eyes glaring, beard smoking, pistols strapped across his chest, is to glimpse a figure out of nightmare. Sailors whisper that Blackbeard is no ordinary man, but some creature conjured from the depths, a demon given human form. This spectacle is not for his own crew, who know him as a man of flesh and blood. It is for the enemy. When a merchant ship sights Blackbeard's vessel drawing closer, black flag rising overhead,
The mere sight of him can sap the will to fight. Many captains surrender rather than risk a bloody engagement. For Blackbeard, this is precisely the outcome he desires. A ship taken without a shot fired means no costly repairs, no wounded men, and no risk to the precious cargo waiting in the hold. He extends his reputation through careful stories, allowing tales of his cruelty and ruthlessness to spread far and wide. He lets rumors grow in the telling, that he slays entire crews, that he spares no one, that he leaves survivors only to carry news of his ferocity back to port. Some of these tales are true, many are not. But Blackbeard understands that the line between truth and legend is thin, and he is content to let fear do half his work. He becomes known for carrying multiple pistols tucked into a bandolier across his chest. Pirates and privateers of the time commonly carry a single pistol, sometimes two, but Blackbeard wears as many as 6, sometimes more, each loaded and ready to fire. In the heat of an engagement, there is no time to reload, a tedious process of powder, wadding, and shot. So Blackbeard plans ahead, ensuring that he can fire repeatedly, each shot adding to the chaos and terror of his assault. Yet for all his fearsome appearance, Blackbeard is not reckless. He is a man who prefers calculation over unnecessary violence. He knows that fear saves ammunition, preserves ships, and protects his crew from needless injury. And so much of his reputation is theater, played out upon the stage of the sea. His smoking beard, his fearsome glare, and the black flags that snap overhead, these are tools, wielded as carefully as any sword. There are times, of course, when blood must be shed. Blackbeard does not shrink from violence when he deems it necessary, but he uses brutality as a message. A single harsh punishment, meted out publicly, ensures obedience from prisoners and crew alike. But these moments are rare. Far more often, ships strike their colors at the mere sight of his approach, unwilling to test the stories told in harbors and taverns from Jamaica to Carolina. Among his own men, Blackbeard's methods earn respect as much as fear. He knows how to manage a pirate crew, a collection of men who have fled the rigid discipline of naval life seeking freedom, but who still require structure to function. He offers them fair shares of plunder, listens to their grievances, and rewards loyalty. The fearsome image he projects to the world is balanced by his practical leadership among his own ranks. He is not a tyrant for the sake of cruelty, but a captain who understands that unity among pirates is as fragile as glass, and that the illusion of invincibility can hold that unity together. In quiet moments, perhaps Blackbeard stands at the rail of his ship, staring across waters tinted gold by the setting sun. He knows that his legend grows with each passing day, and though legends can protect a man, they can also paint a target upon his back. Governors plot his capture, navies dispatch ships to hunt him down, and merchants yearn to see him swing from a gallows. But for now, the seas remain his realm, and his name drifts across the waves like smoke from the fuses braided into his beard.
Imagine yourself standing upon the deck of a ship as dawn begins to break, the horizon turning slowly from black to muted gray. The sea lies calm for the moment, its surface smooth as oil, reflecting the pale sky above. Yet, despite the peace of the scene, there's a tension in the air, a sense that at any moment sails might appear upon the edge of sight,
bringing either fortune or danger. This was the world in which Blackbeard thrived, a world where the boundaries between peace and violence were drawn as thinly as the line where sea meets sky. By the time Edward Teach became known as Blackbeard, he had grown into one of the most recognized figures on the Atlantic seaboard. His reputation for terror was not built solely on appearance, but on bold and calculated engagements that marked him as a captain willing to challenge even the mightiest powers of his day. Among the stories that drift through the ports and taverns of the Caribbean and American colonies, several stand out as the defining chapters of Blackbeard's career. One such chapter unfolded in the bustling waters near Charleston, in the province of South Carolina. In May of 1718, Blackbeard orchestrated one of his most audacious acts, not a storming of decks with cutlasses drawn, but a blockade. Imagine the fear that must have gripped the city as Blackbeard's fleet appeared off the harbor, a small squadron of vessels commanded by a man whose very name sent shivers through merchants and governors alike. For nearly a week, no ship could enter or leave Charleston without risking capture. The purpose of this blockade was not simply plunder. Blackbeard held the city hostage for a very specific demand: medical supplies. His crew was suffering from various ailments, likely infections and injuries from months at sea. Rather than pay for treatment in some distant port, Blackbeard seized the chance to negotiate on his own terms. He captured prominent citizens from vessels leaving Charleston and held them aboard his ships as prisoners, sending a message ashore that they would be harmed if the city did not comply. Charleston's leaders had little choice. They gathered chests filled with medicine, bandages, and other supplies and sent them out to Blackbeard's ships. Only then were the hostages released, unharmed, but no doubt shaken by their days aboard pirate vessels. To the merchants and politicians of the colonies, this event demonstrated Blackbeard's cunning. He could paralyze an entire city, drain it of resources, and leave without firing a single shot. It was piracy elevated to strategy, a demonstration that terror could be wielded as effectively as cannons. Yet not every encounter ended without violence. Blackbeard and his ships were involved in numerous battles that painted his name ever darker in the ledgers of colonial authorities. Reports circulated of swift and sudden attacks upon merchant vessels, where Blackbeard's fleet would appear as if from nowhere, sails trimmed for speed, guns bristling along the rails. Often, the mere sight of his black flags was enough to compel surrender. But there were times when captains chose to resist. In these moments, the sea became a stage for chaos. Cannons thundered, filling the air with smoke so thick that it hung in billowing clouds between the ships. Splinters flew like deadly needles as iron shot slammed into wooden hulls. Men shouted orders above the roar of battle, the shouts sometimes lost in the shriek of rigging torn loose by enemy fire. Blackbeard, it is said, would stride the deck with pistols at his waist and his beard ablaze with slow-burning fuses, a figure both terrifying and strangely composed amid the carnage. In one famous encounter, Blackbeard's ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, ran aground off the coast of North Carolina. Whether this was a calculated move or a genuine accident has long been debated by historians. Some suspect Blackbeard intentionally grounded his ship to reduce the size of his crew and keep a greater share of the treasure for himself. Others believe it was simply a hazard of navigating shallow coastal waters. Whatever the truth, the grounding marked a significant turning point, signaling the beginning of the end for Blackbeard's dominance. Despite such setbacks, Blackbeard remained a potent threat. His name lingered like a storm cloud over the waters of Virginia and Carolina. Colonial governors offered rewards for his capture, and naval forces were dispatched to hunt him down. But Blackbeard's knowledge of the coastal inlets, sandbars, and winding channels gave him an advantage. He slipped away from pursuers, vanishing into the maze of waterways that twisted through the Carolinas, where no large warship dared follow. For the sailors who served under him, each engagement carried both risk and the promise of wealth. A successful battle might bring captured cargoes of sugar, tobacco, indigo, and Spanish silver. But each fight also threatened injury or death. And so men followed Blackbeard, driven by the hope of gold and the fear of the noose. For to be captured meant trial and likely execution as a pirate. In these famous blockades and skirmishes, Blackbeard carved his legend upon the seas, not merely as a man of violence, but as a captain who understood the value of reputation. For him, each battle was as much about the stories it would inspire as the treasure it would yield. And so the tales spread, from Charleston to London, each retelling adding a little more shadow to the figure of Blackbeard, the pirate whose ships seemed to rise from nowhere, who held cities hostage, and whose name still drifts across the ocean winds.
Imagine yourself standing on the edge of a quiet inlet along the coast of North Carolina. The waters are calm, rippling gently beneath the pale sky, and the trees stand thick and silent along the shoreline, their leaves whispering in the faint breeze. The morning air carries the earthy scent of marshes and salt, mingling into a perfume unique to these coastal lands. Yet beneath the hush of nature, another presence lingers, a tension born of rumor and fear. For in these winding channels and shallow bays, one man's name echoes like a distant thunder: Blackbeard. By the year 1718, Blackbeard's reputation has reached its peak. Governors speak his name in angry councils, merchants curse him over ledgers of lost cargo, and sailors murmur stories of his ship appearing like a shadow across the horizon. Despite his fame, or perhaps because of it, Blackbeard begins to find the seas closing in around him. Colonial authorities, driven by pressure from merchants and royal officials, can no longer tolerate a pirate who disrupts trade and embarrasses the crown. Bounties are posted, and ships are commissioned to hunt him down. In this time, Blackbeard retreats into the waterways of North Carolina. The region's coast is a labyrinth of inlets, shoals, and narrow channels, a perfect refuge for a man who knows how to navigate hidden routes. Here he finds temporary shelter, blending into the landscape, slipping from sight whenever naval ships draw too near. He maintains connections with local officials, trading favors and gifts to ensure warnings reach him when danger approaches. It is a delicate balance, one that cannot hold forever. Among those determined to end Blackbeard's career is Alexander Spotswood, the governor of Virginia. Spotswood, concerned that Blackbeard's presence threatens trade and security, resolves to act. He dispatches a small force of ships under the command of Lieutenant Robert Maynard, an officer of the Royal Navy. Maynard is given orders to track Blackbeard through the inlets and rivers of North Carolina,
to capture or kill him, and to bring proof of his death back to the colonial authorities. In November of 1718, Maynard sails south. His ships are modest, light enough to navigate shallow waters, yet armed and crewed by men ready for a deadly encounter. They close in upon Blackbeard near Ocracoke Island, a place of shifting sands and quiet, sheltered waters. The night before the battle, Blackbeard anchors his ship, unaware that his hunters lie close at hand. Dawn comes pale and cool. The waters lie glassy and still, and the sails of Maynard's ships catch the first light of the day as they slip toward Blackbeard's anchorage. What follows is a clash destined to become legend. Blackbeard, seeing the approaching vessels, orders his crew to prepare. Cannon fire erupts across the water, thick smoke rolling across the deck as iron shot tears through wooden planks and sails. The sound echoes between the narrow shores, startling seabirds into flight. Maynard, knowing his ships risk being torn apart by Blackbeard's guns, devises a plan. He orders most of his men below deck, leaving only a few sailors visible. To Blackbeard, it appears as though the British force has been decimated. Confident of an easy victory, Blackbeard draws his ship alongside Maynard's, preparing to board. But as soon as the pirates leap over the rail, Maynard's hidden men surge upward, weapons ready. What ensues is not a broadside battle of cannons, but a savage struggle of pistols, cutlasses, and hand-to-hand combat. Eyewitness accounts tell of Blackbeard fighting with remarkable ferocity. He carries multiple pistols, discharging them one after another in the tight confines of the deck. His cutlass swings wide, leaving men staggering back, blood staining the timbers beneath their feet. Though much of the tale has been embroidered in retelling, it's clear that Blackbeard resists to the very end, refusing to surrender even as the fight turns against him. Ultimately, the pirate who became a legend falls beneath repeated blows. Some accounts say he sustained more than 20 wounds, both by gun and blade. His death marks the end of one of the most storied careers in piracy. Maynard's men cut off Blackbeard's head and hang it from the bowsprit of their ship, a grim trophy to prove to the colonies that the terror of the seas has been vanquished. The body, so it's said, is thrown into the waters off Ocracoke, where rumors claim it swam around the ship several times before sinking, as though unwilling to accept death. After the battle, the captured pirates are taken ashore, some tried and executed, others spared for reasons lost to history. News of Blackbeard's death travels swiftly through the colonies and across the Atlantic. Merchants breathe easier, and governors proclaim victory. Yet the tales of Blackbeard do not die with him. Instead, they grow, taking on a life of their own. In taverns and around campfires, sailors tell of his flaming beard, his eyes blazing like coals, and his ship that moved like a phantom through the night. In the years that follow, his name remains woven into the fabric of sea lore. Charts are marked with warnings, "Here be Blackbeard's haunt." Legends speak of treasure buried on lonely islands, of curses attached to his ill-gotten gold. The man himself is gone, but the idea of Blackbeard persists, a reminder that the sea is a place where men may rise to fearsome heights and fall just as swiftly into darkness.
Imagine yourself standing in the damp coolness of a Spanish colonial warehouse, somewhere along the Caribbean coast, in the early years of the 18th century. The air is thick with the scent of salt, damp wood, and the faint metallic tang of coin and ingot. Shafts of pale sunlight filter through narrow windows high above, falling in slender beams that illuminate stacks of wooden crates and rough hemp sacks piled along the stone walls. The quiet echo of footsteps blends with the distant calls of gulls and the low, steady sound of waves breaking against the harbor's edge. This is the world behind the Spanish treasure fleets, the mighty galleons that carried the wealth of the New World across the Atlantic to the shores of Spain. It is a world of careful record-keeping, heavy locks, and the silent weight of metal. Gold and silver, mined from deep within the mountains of Peru and Mexico, flowed like rivers toward the coastal ports, where it awaited shipment across seas fraught with storms and pirates alike. Men move through the warehouse, each one part of a silent choreography. Laborers strain beneath the weight of small wooden chests, the sides iron-banded, sealed with wax, and marked with painted symbols indicating royal ownership. Some chests contain stacks of silver coins, known as pieces of 8, each one stamped with the arms of the Spanish crown. Others hold gold bars, smooth and heavy, wrapped in cloth to prevent the soft metal from denting. The men carry these chests carefully, setting them down upon scales, overseen by officials with ledgers in hand. Every piece is weighed, counted, and recorded in neat columns of ink. In another corner of the warehouse, clerks work at long tables, their quills scratching steadily over parchment. They note each shipment in meticulous detail: the weight of silver, the count of gold coins, the name of the mine from which the metal came, the date it arrived at the port. Spanish law demanded precise accounting, for the crown claimed a fifth of all treasure extracted from the colonies, the so-called royal fifth. The king's share was sacred, and any attempt to hide or divert wealth invited harsh punishment. Beyond the warehouse doors lies the harbor, crowded with ships. Galleons rest at anchor, their hulls broad and rounded, towering over the smaller coastal vessels. Their high sides gleam where sunlight touches the wet timbers, and their rigging hums softly in the breeze. Men climb ropes, adjust sails, and lower cargo nets into the waiting holds. The sound of hammering rings through the air as shipwrights make last-minute repairs or strengthen bulkheads for the coming journey. Imagine stepping aboard one of these great ships. The deck beneath your feet smells of pitch and salt, and the boards are worn smooth by years of voyages. Below, the holds are dark and cavernous, spaces meant to carry not only treasure but goods of every kind: tobacco, spices, indigo, cochineal dye, and sometimes even passengers bound for the old world. In these dim holds, the treasure is stored with care. Chests of silver are stacked close together, heavy and solid, forming walls of wealth that must be secured so they do not shift in heavy seas. Sailors and soldiers alike watch over these precious stores. The Spanish crown understands well that gold attracts attention. Guards stand at hatches, muskets resting across their chests, eyes alert for any hint of theft or sabotage. Every man aboard knows the punishment for stealing even a single coin is severe. Yet rumors persist of secret compartments hidden in the holds, where a few officers or merchants might conceal an extra bar of silver or a handful of gems, hoping to smuggle private treasure back to Spain away from the crown's tally. As the day of departure approaches, activity aboard the galleon reaches a fevered pace. Supplies are loaded: barrels of water, salted meat,
hardtack, beans, and rice. The lists are checked and rechecked. The crew gathers on deck for roll calls, while officers examine charts and debate routes. Hurricanes are a constant threat, and decisions must be made whether to risk a longer route through safer waters or a shorter path through seas known for storms. On shore, merchants and officials gather to watch the fleet. Mothers and wives wipe tears from their eyes, for the journey across the Atlantic is long and perilous. Some ships will never return, claimed by storms or the hidden reefs that lie in wait beneath turquoise waters. Others may fall prey to pirates, who lurk along shipping routes, eager to seize the wealth that spills from these ports in such staggering quantities. And when at last the sails are unfurled and the anchors weighed, the galleons move slowly from the harbor, sails bright in the sun, banners flying the royal colors. From the shore, they look majestic and invincible. But for all their grandeur, they carry with them a cargo that makes them both powerful and vulnerable. Inside those timbered hulls lies the wealth of empires, a glittering fortune of silver and gold that draws eyes both lawful and lawless across thousands of miles of open sea. And so these ships begin their long voyage, their holds heavy with treasure, their decks crowded with men who know the risks. For though the galleons symbolize royal power, they are also floating prizes for any who dare to challenge them. In every chest of silver lies the promise of wealth beyond imagining, and the shadow of danger that follows wherever such riches travel.
Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a Spanish galleon as dusk begins to fall. The horizon glows faintly with the last light of day, while a soft breeze rustles through the rigging overhead. The ocean lies calm for now, gentle waves reflecting streaks of gold and purple across their rolling surface. Men move about the deck with a quiet efficiency, checking ropes, securing hatches, and scanning the skies for any sign of change. For in these seas, even a perfect evening can be the silent herald of disaster. In the Caribbean and the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, hurricanes arrive with sudden fury. Mariners speak of them in low voices, calling them by many names: tempestades, ciclones, huracanes. These storms gather their strength in the hot, humid months, drawing power from the sun-heated waters that stretch endlessly to the horizon. One moment, the sky is clear and blue. The next, dark clouds boil up from the distance, driven by winds that howl like wild creatures. The change can be so swift that even seasoned sailors find themselves caught before sails can be reefed or anchor cables paid out. The Spanish treasure fleets, heavy with silver and gold, were especially vulnerable. Laden deep in their hulls with chests of coins and bars of precious metal, the ships rode low in the water. Their great bulk, so impressive in calm seas, became a liability when confronted by walls of wind and water. The weight of treasure meant the ships responded sluggishly to the helm, and as waves grew, their towering sides presented broad surfaces for the gale to shove and batter. Imagine the warning signs as they appear. First, the air grows heavy, as though pressing upon your chest. The wind drops away until the sails hang limp, and an unnatural stillness grips the ocean. Birds vanish, fleeing the coming violence. Then a distant line appears upon the water, a dark smudge at first, barely noticeable. But soon it reveals itself as a curtain of rain, driven before a screaming wind. The sea itself changes color, shifting from deep blue to a sullen green, marked with white-capped waves.
Within minutes, the storm arrives in full. Winds roar through the rigging, tearing at canvas and ropes. Rain falls in solid sheets, striking the deck with the sound of 1,000 drumbeats. Waves mount higher and higher, towering above the ship's rails, then crashing down with immense force. The timbers groan and shudder beneath the assault, and the masts bend under the strain, creaking like living things in pain. Below decks, darkness becomes near total. Lanterns blow out, leaving men struggling to find footing on planks awash with seawater. The treasure holds flood as seams split and barrels break free, rolling with heavy thuds. Chests of silver slide across the decks, colliding into bulkheads with dull metallic crashes. Men shout to be heard above the storm, their voices strained, eyes wide with fear as they fight to keep the ship afloat. Some captains attempt to run before the wind, hoping to ride out the storm. Others drop anchors in shallow waters, praying that the cables will hold against the violent seas. Yet in hurricanes, hope often proves a slender thread. Anchors drag across sandy bottoms, snapping cables like twine. Hulls grind against coral reefs or hidden shoals. The splintering crack of timber echoes as ships break apart, leaving only fragments of rigging and cargo strewn across raging surf. Imagine the shoreline in the storm's aftermath. The sky clears to an eerie brightness, with sun shining through torn clouds. Along the beaches lie pieces of ships, planks, broken spars, shattered barrels. Chests burst open, their silver spilling across white sands, coins scattered like seashells. Sailors stumble ashore, bruised and salt-soaked, eyes vacant with exhaustion and shock. Some weep openly for comrades lost to the waves, while others stare out at the rolling sea as though unable to comprehend that they have survived. Local fishermen and villagers soon appear, drawn by rumors of treasure washed ashore. In many places, the sight of a wreck brings not sorrow, but opportunity. Men gather coins by the handful, digging them from the wet sand or prying them from smashed chests. Stories circulate of peasants becoming wealthy overnight, though many of these tales fade into legend, their truth forever blurred by time and retelling. The Spanish crown took such losses seriously. Officials organized salvage operations, dispatching divers and crews to recover what they could from the reefs and shallows. Yet the sea often claimed more than it returned. Once a ship sank beneath the waves, treasure could vanish into deep canyons, buried under shifting sands and coral growth. Maps were drawn and redrawn, marking where ships went down, but the ocean guarded its secrets closely. For the Spanish Empire, hurricanes were as great an enemy as pirates or rival nations. In a single storm, an entire year's wealth could disappear, changing the balance of power across Europe. Merchants and kings alike awaited news with anxious hearts, scanning the horizon for sails that might never arrive. And so imagine yourself, centuries ago, standing among survivors on a storm-wrecked shore. The sun gleams on scattered silver as waves continue to roll in, each surge depositing more fragments of a once proud ship. The air smells of salt and wet wood. Above all, there is a sense of quiet, as though the sea itself rests after the fury it unleashed. Yet beneath that quiet, you know that somewhere, hidden in the depths, lie chests of gold and silver, waiting for the next storm or the next daring diver to bring their secrets back into the light.
Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a modern salvage vessel, somewhere above the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. The sun hangs bright overhead, the sea around you shifting from deep sapphire to brilliant jade, where coral reefs shimmer just beneath the surface. Yet, despite the beauty, the people aboard this ship are here for a single purpose:
to search for treasures that have lain hidden beneath these waters for centuries. For long after the storms passed and the waves calmed, the stories of Spanish galleons lost with holds full of silver and gold continued to drift through the centuries. Shipwrecks that vanished beneath hurricanes remained known by name and by legend, whispered among divers, historians, and treasure hunters. And in more recent times, modern technology has breathed new life into these tales, turning old legends into tangible finds. One of the most famous of these recoveries came in the 20th century, when the name Mel Fisher became known far beyond circles of divers and historians. Born in Indiana, Fisher began his career as a dive shop owner and underwater enthusiast. But over time, his fascination turned toward the lost treasures of the Spanish fleets. He believed firmly that fortune still lay hidden along the Florida reefs, waiting for someone determined enough to find it. In particular, Fisher set his sights on the wreck of the Nuestra Señora de Atocha, a Spanish treasure galleon lost in 1622. The Atocha was part of a fleet that departed Havana, laden with an immense cargo, chests filled with silver coins, gold bars, emeralds the size of thumbnails, and countless other relics of Spain's colonial wealth. The find was so vast that it became one of the most valuable treasure discoveries in modern history, valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Fisher's famous motto, "Today's the day," echoed through news reports worldwide, turning him into a figure of modern legend. Yet Mel Fisher's story was only one chapter in the ongoing saga of treasure hunting. Throughout the Caribbean, other explorers have discovered fragments of Spanish fleets, sometimes with spectacular results, sometimes only with small traces hinting at greater wealth still buried beneath shifting sands. Sophisticated sonar, submersibles, and magnetometers have transformed shipwreck hunting from guesswork into a science, allowing divers to locate iron cannons, ballast stones, and even delicate silver coins resting silently upon the ocean floor. Some of these discoveries were accidental. Fishermen dragging nets stumbled upon pieces of old wrecks, or scuba divers found glittering coins half buried in the sand. In other cases, dedicated archaeologists conducted systematic searches, carefully mapping sites and recovering artifacts while documenting their historical context. Each find adds another layer to the understanding of maritime history, reminding us that the ocean still holds secrets from centuries past. Yet, for all the treasure pulled from the sea, legends persist of even greater fortunes waiting to be found. Maps drawn by survivors, records stored in dusty archives, and the occasional rumor of an unexplored reef keep hope alive among modern hunters. They dream of ships like the San Jose, another Spanish galleon said to have carried unimaginable wealth before vanishing beneath the waves. The ocean remains a place where history and myth overlap, each discovery a reminder that the past is never entirely lost. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of that modern salvage ship, salt spray cool upon your face, gazing out across the endless blue. Beneath you lie centuries of secrets, timbers blackened by age, chests of silver and gold, and the lost stories of men who sailed under flags now faded with time. For as long as humans have crossed the seas, treasures have sunk beneath them, and there will always be those who seek to bring them back into the light.
Imagine yourself seated in a quiet courtroom, far from the sea, where polished wooden benches and high windows replace the creak of timbers and the crash of waves. The air is still, carrying the faint scent of paper and ink, while the murmur of voices blends into a low hum. Here, men and women in dark robes debate matters that reach across centuries and oceans. For although the Spanish galleons lie silent beneath the waves, the treasures they carried continue to stir disputes, long after the storms that sank them have passed. From the moment a diver discovers even a single silver coin resting on the seafloor, questions arise. To whom does that coin belong? Is it the property of the diver, who risked time and money to find it? Does it belong to the nation whose waters hide the wreck? Or to the descendants of the Spanish crown, which centuries ago laid claim to every ounce of gold and silver carried in those wooden hulls? The ocean may be vast and silent, but the corridors of law echo with these questions, often louder than cannon fire ever did. Consider again the saga of the Atocha, the Spanish galleon recovered by Mill Fisher and his team. When Fisher finally brought up the treasure he had spent years searching for, he did not simply sail home in triumph. Instead, he found himself entangled in a complex web of legal challenges. The state of Florida claimed rights over the wreck, arguing that it lay within state waters. The U.S. federal government asserted interests as well, citing historical preservation laws meant to protect cultural heritage. Even Spain itself raised objections, arguing that as a sovereign nation, it retained ownership of the galleon and its cargo under principles of international law. Court cases dragged on for years, documents piled high with arguments citing ancient treaties, maritime customs, and modern statutes. Attorneys debated terms like sovereign immunity, finders keepers, and cultural patrimony. Judges weighed whether treasure should be considered mere property, subject to salvage rights, or sacred artifacts belonging to the heritage of a nation. In the end, the courts ruled in Fisher's favor, granting him much of the Atocha's treasure. Yet the legal fees and years spent in litigation reminded all treasure hunters that the sea's riches come at a cost far beyond the price of ships and divers. The Atocha case was only one example in a long history of legal entanglements surrounding sunken treasure. Around the world, similar disputes unfold whenever divers surface with glittering coins or golden artifacts. In the waters off Colombia, the legendary wreck of the San Jose remains locked in legal uncertainty. This Spanish galleon, believed to hold billions in treasure, has sparked debates between the Colombian government, private salvage firms, and Spain, each asserting competing claims. The wreck lies undiscovered, or perhaps secretly located, its precise coordinates guarded like a state secret. International conventions attempt to bring order to these conflicts. The UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage, adopted in 2001, aims to preserve shipwrecks and prevent looting. It declares that underwater cultural heritage should not be commercially exploited, and that discoveries must be reported and protected for humanity as a whole. Yet not all nations have signed the convention, and laws remain inconsistent from one coastline to another. Where one country sees artifacts of global importance, another sees rightful property to be claimed and sold. Imagine the frustration of a modern diver who, after years of research, locates a Spanish shipwreck filled with silver coins and emeralds. The ocean may have yielded its secrets, but now the diver faces an entirely different ocean, the legal sea of paperwork, claims, and international law.
Lawyers become as important as divers, and battles unfold not with cutlasses or cannons, but with court filings and legal briefs. Sometimes the arguments turn on tiny details. Was the wreck discovered in territorial waters or in international seas? Did the ship sink as a merchant vessel, or was it on a mission for the Spanish crown, which might grant it immunity as a sovereign vessel? How much time has passed since the sinking, and do modern nations have a right to claim ownership over something lost hundreds of years ago? Each question spawns more questions, winding into legal complexities that seem as endless as the ocean itself. Despite the legal storms, treasure hunters remain undeterred. The allure of lost gold, combined with the thrill of discovery, draws divers and investors alike. But all know that finding a shipwreck is only the first part of the quest. The second part may prove even more challenging, convincing courts, governments, and historians of one's right to keep the riches hauled from the sea. And so, the treasures of the Spanish galleons continue to live a double life. Beneath the waves, they rest in silence, guarded by coral and sand, their secrets preserved by darkness and salt. Above the waves, they exist in legal arguments, in treaties and claims, in visions of museums or auction houses. The same gold that once financed empires now funds legal battles, where words become weapons and parchment replaces plunder. Imagine yourself leaving the courtroom, stepping once more into sunlight and hearing the distant crash of waves. Somewhere out there beneath the shifting blue lie fortunes untouched for centuries. Yet, as history has shown, the true cost of treasure may not lie in the depths of the sea, but in the labyrinth of laws waiting on shore.
Imagine yourself stepping through carved wooden doors into the cool interior of the governor's mansion in Port Royal, Jamaica. The world outside lies scorched beneath the brilliant Caribbean sun, but within these walls the air is shaded and perfumed. Light filters through latticed windows, casting delicate patterns across polished floors. The quiet echo of footsteps mixes with the faint rustle of silk and the low hum of conversation, for this is a place of power, of wealth, and of carefully maintained appearances. Port Royal, in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, was known as the richest and wickedest city in the New World. Its docks teemed with merchants, sailors, and privateers, all drawn by the flow of gold and goods through the Caribbean. Yet amid the chaos and noise of the bustling harbor, the governor's mansion stood as a symbol of order and grandeur. Here, the colony's highest official lived in rooms furnished with imported chairs of carved mahogany, gleaming brass fixtures, and long tables laid with linen cloths as white as sea foam. Within these walls, parties unfolded that dazzled the eyes and ears. Imagine chandeliers glimmering with candlelight, each flame captured and multiplied in the facets of cut glass. Servants moved quietly through the rooms, carrying trays laden with delicate pastries, glazed fruits, and goblets filled with imported wine. The air shimmered with the scent of roses, jasmine, and exotic spices, wafting from bowls of potpourri and from the fine silk garments worn by the guests. Men arrived dressed in coats of brilliant color, deep crimson, emerald green, or sapphire blue, each tailored to precise fashion. Gold buttons gleamed on sleeves and waistcoats, and lace cascaded from cuffs and collars in soft waves of white. Powdered wigs sat high upon their heads, each curl carefully arranged, their hair dusted pale as flour. Even the slightest movement released a faint cloud of scented powder, mixing with the candlelight in drifting motes. Women entered on slippered feet, gowns rustling around them like ripples upon the sea. Bodices were stiff and ornate, embroidered with threads of silver and gold, while skirts billowed wide over layered petticoats. Pearls gleamed at throats and wrists, and small fans fluttered like delicate wings as the ladies spoke in low tones, laughing behind half-concealing folds of silk and ivory. Each woman was both ornament and strategist, for in this world appearances were currency, and alliances could be forged with a glance across the ballroom. The music floated through the halls, soft notes from violins, gentle chords from a harpsichord, the occasional trill of a flute. Couples moved in measured steps across the floor, their feet tracing patterns set by the dance masters of Europe. Even here, in this colonial outpost far from London or Madrid, the dances of the court were practiced with earnest devotion. Gavottes and minuets, each movement elegant and precise, filled the evening hours, offering a graceful veneer to a city whose wealth often came from less refined pursuits. Amid laughter and music, conversation spun tales of ships sighted off distant coasts, of the rise and fall of sugar prices, of the sudden appearance of a new privateer captain rumored to have taken a Spanish treasure ship. The talk was polite, but edged with calculation, for each guest carried personal ambitions. Merchants sought licenses, sea captains courted favor for protection against rivals, and planters hoped for tax relief on their shipments of rum and molasses. The governor listened, nodded, and measured each word, knowing that every alliance could tip the balance of power in this wealthy but precarious colony. Wine flowed freely, imported from Europe at staggering cost, alongside rum distilled from local cane fields. Toasts were made to the king, to the queen, to the prosperity of Jamaica, and to the continued success of trade across the Atlantic. Between courses, guests slipped into adjoining chambers to speak in quieter tones, striking bargains or exchanging whispered gossip. A single rumor, born in the hush of a drawing room, could ripple outward to influence markets, political decisions, or the course of a merchant's fortune. And yet, for all its elegance, the governor's mansion was not removed from the world beyond its gates. Servants moved through the rooms bearing traces of the harbor's air upon their clothes. Outside, the streets were alive with sailors, tavern songs, and the cries of merchants haggling over barrels of spices and sacks of sugar. The mansion stood as a fortress of civility, but its foundations rested upon the restless commerce of Port Royal, a city where wealth arrived on ships laden with gold, silver, and human cargo. So imagine yourself, glass in hand, standing near one of those latticed windows, the warm Caribbean breeze slipping through the slats. You look out over rooftops toward the harbor, where masts sway like tall reeds. Inside, laughter and music continue, the candle flames quiver, and the scent of wax and roses floats gently on the air. Here, amid silk gowns and powdered wigs,
the colony's elite gathered to enjoy the fruits of trade and power, even as unseen tides, political and literal, begin to stir beneath the surface.
Within the grand rooms of the governor's mansion in Port Royal, beneath chandeliers shimmering with candlelight, conversations often drifted beyond polite talk of trade and fashion. Behind the silken curtains and the polished wood paneling lay a truth rarely spoken aloud, that the wealth of Port Royal did not flow solely from lawful commerce. Beneath its elegant surface pulsed an undercurrent of deals struck in secrecy, agreements shaped by coin and quiet nods, and the peculiar relationship between the colonial authorities and the pirates who haunted the Caribbean seas. Port Royal, with its busy harbor and influx of goods from all corners of the Atlantic, stood as a gateway between the old world and the new. Merchants grew rich trading sugar, rum, spices, and precious metals. But piracy, though condemned in royal decrees, was often an unspoken partner in this prosperity. Many of the goods that found their way into Port Royal's warehouses arrived there not through official channels, but through pirates seeking to dispose of stolen cargoes for hard cash. Governors and colonial officials faced a difficult balance. On one hand, they were sworn to uphold the laws of the crown, to pursue pirates and maintain order. On the other, they knew that privateers and pirates alike brought wealth into the colony, spending their gold freely in the taverns and shops, bolstering the local economy. For every law written against piracy, there existed a quiet practice of looking the other way when the coin was sufficient. It was not uncommon for pirate captains to appear discreetly in the governor's residence, arriving at night through back gates, avoiding the eyes of common townsfolk. Within private chambers, negotiations took place over tables scattered with maps and charts. A pirate might offer a share of his plunder, sometimes a generous one, in exchange for a safe harbor, a promise of protection, or simply silence from the authorities. Gold, silver, and jewels changed hands, not always recorded in official ledgers. Such arrangements benefited all involved. Pirates gained a refuge where their ships could be refitted, their wounded cared for, and their spoils sold without fear of immediate arrest. Colonial officials, in turn, secured revenue for the colony, and often for themselves personally. A governor might publicly denounce piracy while quietly accepting gifts that ensured certain ships passed unhindered through Jamaican waters. Merchants, too, participated, eager to buy goods at prices far below market rates, even if those goods bore a faint shadow of illegality. The line between privateer and pirate blurred further these years. Many pirates held commissions, or letters of marque, issued during wars that permitted them to attack enemy ships legally. When peace returned, some simply kept sailing, unwilling to give up the lucrative business of capturing merchant vessels. Governors who had once relied on privateers for defense sometimes found themselves harboring men now labeled outlaws. And in many cases, the transition from legal privateer to pirate required only a small bribe to ensure papers were overlooked or records quietly lost. Rumors circulated constantly through the streets of Port Royal. There were stories of governors who grew rich through secret partnerships with notorious captains. Names like Henry Morgan, who began as a privateer and ended his days as lieutenant governor of Jamaica, stood as proof that the path from outlaw to respectable official was not as impossible as it seemed. Tales abounded of pirate ships anchored in hidden bays, their sails furled while captains dined with colonial dignitaries on fine china, the table set with imported wines and roasted meats. Occasionally, scandal erupted into the open. A pirate might betray an arrangement, or a merchant might speak too freely after too many cups of rum. Royal inquiries would follow.
letters dispatched to London demanding explanations, and officials might be removed from their posts, but such episodes rarely changed the underlying realities. New governors arrived, new privateers rose to prominence, and the discreet dance of bribery continued as though nothing had ever disturbed the surface calm. The ordinary people of Port Royal, shopkeepers, artisans, tavern owners, benefited as well. Coins captured on distant seas filtered down into the local economy, funding new buildings, paying for fine clothes, and filling the docks with ships eager to trade. Even church collections swelled with gold that had once ridden in Spanish galleons. Few asked too many questions about the origins of such wealth, for to question was to risk the collapse of the delicate system that kept the city thriving. And so, beneath the chandeliers and among the silk gowns and powdered wigs, the governor's mansion served as more than just the seat of colonial government. It was a silent stage for negotiations between law and lawlessness, a place where pirates found unlikely allies among officials sworn to hunt them. In the flicker of candlelight, gold moved quietly from pirate coffers into colonial pockets, securing a fragile peace and ensuring that Port Royal continued to flourish, balanced delicately between royal decree and the black flag flying just beyond the horizon.
In the grand salons and shaded corridors of Port Royal's governor's mansion, not every conversation revolved around ships, trade, or political alliances. Beneath the polite surface of colonial society existed another realm altogether, a world woven of whispered words, covert observations, and favors traded in quiet shadows. At the center of this hidden world moved the courtesans of Port Royal, women whose beauty and intelligence granted them entry into circles closed to many men, and whose influence extended far beyond the confines of ballrooms and private chambers. Courtesans in Port Royal were far more than simple companions. Many were educated, multilingual, and skilled in navigating the delicate currents of social and political intrigue. Their presence was accepted, even expected, at the lavish gatherings held within the governor's mansion and among the elite of the city. Draped in silks and adorned with jewels, they conversed with merchants, ship captains, naval officers, and colonial officials alike, listening carefully as men spoke freely in the glow of candlelight and the soft strains of music. For these women, information was as valuable as gold. Every word overheard, every secret hinted at over a glass of wine, became part of a vast, informal network of intelligence. Courtesans shared news among themselves in discreet conversations, piecing together bits of information to form a clearer picture of events unfolding across the Caribbean. In an age when letters could take weeks or months to cross the ocean, these women often knew of changes in alliances, the movements of pirate ships, or the plans of governors before the news reached official channels. Governors and military commanders were not blind to the usefulness of such intelligence. Some cultivated quiet relationships with courtesans, offering them protection or gifts in exchange for information. A whispered warning about a pirate fleet gathering near Hispaniola, or the rumor of a Spanish convoy preparing to sail, could mean the difference between profit and disaster for colonial authorities. Even the British Admiralty valued such reports, recognizing that informal sources sometimes provided clearer insight than official dispatches. But information flowed both ways. Courtesans, moving freely between circles, sometimes carried messages for pirates or privateers,
smuggling notes hidden within fans, hairpieces, or folded scraps of silk. A casual conversation over supper might convey a warning about ships patrolling the waters off Jamaica, or reveal the intentions of merchants preparing to send cargo northward under armed escort. In a city where law and piracy often intertwined, loyalties shifted as easily as the tide, and courtesans navigated these shifting sands with remarkable skill. Beyond intelligence, courtesans served another function within the colony's delicate social structure. In a city crowded with sailors, merchants, and officials, many of whom lived far from families left behind in Europe, the presence of these women offered a semblance of refinement and familiarity. Their salons were places where men could relax, speak freely, and momentarily escape the harsh realities of colonial life. Behind painted fans and soft laughter, negotiations were conducted, alliances forged, and disputes quietly settled without the need for public confrontation. It was whispered in Port Royal that some of the governor's most trusted informants were courtesans, women who moved between the grand mansion and the busy taverns along the waterfront. They gathered knowledge not only from wealthy planters and naval officers, but also from sailors fresh off voyages, men who carried tales of hidden coves, sunken ships, and pirate rendezvous points. In the labyrinth of narrow streets, courtyards, and secret passageways, these women became the silent conduits through which secrets traveled. Their influence extended even into matters of diplomacy. Envoys from foreign powers occasionally sought the company of courtesans, hoping to extract or impart information. French agents, Spanish merchants, and Dutch traders all recognized the value of cultivating relationships with women who could relay messages without leaving a trace of official correspondence. Through this web of personal connections, courtesans became silent participants in the larger political games that shaped the Caribbean. Yet life for these women was not without peril. To be caught carrying a letter for a pirate captain or passing secrets to foreign agents could result in imprisonment or worse. Colonial authorities, while eager for information, also held the power to silence those who knew too much. Some courtesans vanished from Port Royal's streets overnight, their names spoken only in cautious whispers. Others retired quietly, wealthy enough to purchase small plantations or houses in safer colonies, leaving behind the intrigues and dangers of the city. Despite these risks, the courtesans of Port Royal continued to ply their trade, weaving together beauty, charm, and intelligence into a potent tool for influence. They were among the colony's most effective and least acknowledged players in the endless game of power and survival. Through them, the governor's mansion was connected not only to the polite world of colonial society, but also to the shadowed networks of pirates, spies, and merchants who shaped the true destiny of the Caribbean.
In the early hours of the morning, on June 7th, 1692, Port Royal awoke to a day much like any other. The sun rose over the Caribbean, painting the harbor in shades of gold. Ships rocked gently at anchor, merchants prepared their wares, and the streets bustled with life as sailors, traders, and townspeople went about their business. The air carried the familiar scents of salt, spices, and roasting meat drifting from taverns. Beneath this lively surface, however, forces were gathering in silence, hidden deep within the earth. Port Royal had grown in less than half a century from a modest settlement into one of the richest cities in the New World.
Gold and silver passed through its docks, carried by Spanish galleons and seized by privateers. The taverns overflowed with sailors, adventurers, and merchants seeking to spend their fortunes. The governor's mansion presided over a town that thrived on commerce, rumor, and often a fine balance between law and lawlessness. But on that June day, the ground beneath Port Royal betrayed the people who had built their fortunes upon it. Just before noon, the ground began to tremble. At first, it was a faint shiver, barely enough to rattle cups upon wooden tables. Then, in a matter of moments, the trembling grew violent. Buildings shook as if seized by unseen hands. Tiles crashed from rooftops. Brick walls split open, sending dust billowing into the sunlight. The sea, which moments before lay calm and bright, drew back suddenly, leaving the harbor floor exposed, littered with fish and stranded boats. The earthquake struck with terrible force. Cracks opened in the ground, widening with each passing second. Entire streets buckled and twisted, their cobblestones upheaved like waves frozen in stone. Houses, warehouses, and churches collapsed in upon themselves, burying those within beneath splinters of timber and fragments of masonry. In the governor's mansion, chandeliers crashed to the floor, shattering in a rain of glass and molten wax. Walls groaned under the strain, as if the building itself were alive and crying out in pain. Perhaps the most devastating blow fell when vast sections of the city, built upon sandy soil, simply slid into the sea. Witnesses described how solid ground seemed to melt, swallowing buildings, people, and even entire streets. The harbor waters rushed back with a roaring surge, flooding the ruins, carrying debris and bodies into deeper waters. Ships moored at the docks were torn from their lines, tossed like toys amid the chaos. Survivors staggered through clouds of dust and salt spray, dazed and bleeding, calling out for loved ones who would never answer. Some climbed onto floating timbers or clung to pieces of wreckage as the water surged around them. Others fled inland, away from the shifting earth and collapsing structures. The noise was immense, a rolling thunder that seemed to come from the earth itself, mingled with the cries of the wounded and the crashing of waves against fallen walls. In the aftermath, Port Royal lay in ruin. 2/3 of the city had vanished beneath the sea. Those who remained faced disease and hunger. Water sources were contaminated by debris and corpses, and food became scarce as supplies were buried or swept away. The air grew thick with the scent of rot and salt, a reminder that life, once abundant and boisterous, had given way to silence and despair. In the days that followed, survivors began the grim task of recovering what they could. Bodies were pulled from the rubble, while goods and treasures were salvaged from the shallows. Yet no amount of recovery could restore the city to what it had been. The earthquake was not merely a natural disaster. It marked the end of Port Royal's age of excess. The city, once called the wickedest city on earth, became a ghost of its former self. The harbor that had welcomed so many ships now lay over streets and buildings hidden beneath the waves. Over time, nature continued its quiet work of concealment. Coral and sand covered the submerged ruins, turning the sunken city into an underwater world where fish swam through windows once filled with laughter and light. Divers in centuries to come would descend through warm Caribbean waters to glimpse stone walls, cobblestones, and the remains of taverns that once rang with music and voices. Each artifact recovered, a wine bottle, a pewter plate, a silver coin, became a fragment of a lost world. Historians and archaeologists have since studied the sunken remains of Port Royal, piecing together the city's layout, its buildings, and the lives of those who once walked its streets. The earthquake has become a defining chapter in the city's story, a moment when wealth, decadence, and human ambition collided with the raw forces of the earth. Even today, the name Port Royal evokes images of pirates and treasure, but also the sobering reminder that no amount of gold can withstand the power of nature when it chooses to reclaim its dominion. In the quiet waters where the city once stood, the sun glints off gentle waves, and the past lies hidden beneath the surface, preserved in silence. Port Royal's riches, its secrets, and its tragedies remain beneath the sea, a lost world waiting for those who dare to look beneath the calm face of the Caribbean.